A crystal glass shatters. A pregnant woman hits the marble floor. And the most feared man in Chicago stops breathing. Because the woman bleeding at his feet isn't a stranger. She's the widow of the man who died in his place. She ran for months, erased herself from every record, changed her name, swallowed her grief in silence. And somehow, impossibly, fate dropped her right back into his world. But what Damien Vale doesn't know yet is that her being here tonight was never an accident. Someone engineered this moment. Someone wanted him to find her, and that someone is already watching. If this story grips you, hit like right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this is only the beginning. Set. The glass hit the floor before anyone understood what had happened. 1 second, the Blackstone Lounge hummed with the low orchestral murmur of money and cigarette smoke and $2,000 bottles of wine being poured into crystal that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The next second, the music lurched to a halt. Not because the DJ stopped, but because the sound of breaking glass has a particular frequency that cuts through crowd noise the way nothing else does. Sharp. Conclusive. Final. Elena Voss heard the crash the same moment she felt the impact. Her tray had barely clipped the elbow of the woman in the silver gown. An accident, a stumble, the champagne flute toppling in what felt like slow motion, and then the world tilted sideways and her lower back connected with the marble, and her breath left her body in one strangled gasp, and she was on the ground, hands instinctively curling around her stomach before she even fully registered the fall. 7 months. She was 7 months along. The first thing she felt was panic, the kind that comes from somewhere older than thought, somewhere the body has its own language. Her palms pressed flat against the cold floor. She made herself breathe. She counted. The baby moved, a slow, rolling shift beneath her ribs. And she exhaled so hard her vision blurred. She was still alive. The baby was still moving. The second thing she felt was pain. Her hip had taken the worst of it. Her left palm was bleeding from a shard of glass. And above her, very close, a woman was speaking. "Are you serious right now?" Not a question, a verdict. Elena looked up. Brielle Ashcroft stood over her with the particular stillness of someone who had spent their entire life certain they were the most important person in any room they entered. She was 32, dressed in something that probably had a name Elena couldn't pronounce. And her gown, cream silk, floor-length, the kind of fabric that shimmers when it moves, had a wet champagne stain spreading from the hip down toward the hem. She was staring at it. Then she looked at Elena on the floor, and her expression shifted into something that was almost more frightening than rage. Contempt so pure it had no heat in it. "Do you have any idea," Brielle said slowly, "what this dress cost?" Elena opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her hip was throbbing. She was trying to get her hands underneath herself to stand up. "Don't," Brielle said. Elena stopped. "I'm talking to you." Brielle crouched slightly, not to help, but to make sure Elena was looking at her. "You ruined a $40,000 dress. You're pregnant, which, fine, congratulations, but that doesn't make you immune to consequences. You were careless. You were slow. And now you are going to look at me and explain to me why I should not have your manager fire you this instant." "I'm sorry," Elena said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "It was an accident. I lost my balance. My hip. I don't care about your hip." The crowd around them had arranged itself into a loose ring. No one moved, no one spoke. A few people had their phones out and then put them away again, reading something in the atmosphere of the room that told them recording this would be a mistake. The lounge staff hovered at a careful distance. Elena could see Marcus, her shift manager, standing 15 feet away with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, doing the math on whether intervening would make things worse. He decided it would. He stayed where he was. Brielle straightened up and smoothed her ruined gown with both hands, an action so reflexive it was almost unconscious, and then she looked at Elena one more time with that flat, airless contempt. "Get up," she said. "Get your manager. And get out of my section." Elena got one hand under herself. Her hips screamed. The baby shifted again, lower this time, and something about the pressure made her breath catch in a way that frightened her more than the fall had. She was trying to stand without using her left hand because the glass had bitten into her palm and the marble beneath it was slick. She was almost upright, and then Brielle's hand connected with the side of her face. It wasn't a closed fist. Just an open palm, fast and hard, the kind of strike someone delivers when they have been raised to believe that certain people exist below the threshold where violence becomes unacceptable. The crack of it was loud enough that the woman closest to them actually flinched. Elena's head snapped sideways and she went down again, harder this time, one knee hitting the marble, her free hand barely catching herself before her face did. The room went absolutely silent. Not the polite quiet of interrupted conversation, something older. Something that lives in the human body and activates when the air pressure changes in a way that says, something is wrong here. Something dangerous is close. Elena stayed on the ground with her head down and her eyes closed and her hand pressed to her stomach. Her cheek burned. The baby was still. For 3 seconds, everything in the room was still. Then she heard footsteps. Not the nervous shuffle of bystanders deciding whether to intervene. These were different, deliberate, unhurried. The footsteps of someone for whom urgency would be weakness, who had learned long ago that the most frightening thing a powerful man can do is move slowly. She felt him before she saw him. The way the air in the room reorganized itself around whoever was approaching. The way people stepped back without being asked. The way the silence deepened instead of breaking. Then a hand appeared in her field of vision. Not reaching down to help her. Not yet. Just resting at knee height, palm open, waiting. She looked up. Damien Vale was not what most people imagined when they pictured a crime lord. He was 41, dark-haired, going silver at the temples, built like someone who still did the physical work and kept himself in condition for it. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie. His face was the kind that had been handsome once in a simpler way and had grown into something more complicated, sharp lines, a mouth that sat in a neutral expression that could mean anything. His eyes were the color of deep water, and they were fixed on Elena with an intensity that had nothing performative in it. He had gone pale. Not the paleness of shock. Something deeper. Something that moved through him like cold water through a crack in stone. Slow, unstoppable, fundamental. He knew her face. Elena stared at him and felt the floor tilt in a way that had nothing to do with her fall. She knew his face too. "Take my hand," he said. His voice was low, even, the kind of voice that has trained itself out of every register that might betray something. "I'm fine," she said, which was not true. Elena. Just her name. 2 syllables, delivered with a precision that told her arguing would cost more than it was worth. She took his hand. He was stronger than he looked, or maybe she weighed less than she felt these days. He brought her upright with one smooth motion, one arm coming around her back to stabilize her, and for a moment they were close enough that she could feel the warmth of him and smell the faint trace of expensive soap and cigarette smoke that clung to his collar. She had forgotten that smell. She had not known she remembered it until this moment. She pulled back. He let her, but his hand stayed at her elbow. Brielle had not moved. She was watching the tableau in front of her with an expression that had gone from contempt through uncertainty and was now arriving, with evident displeasure, at something approaching concern. "Damien," she said. Her voice had changed. "I didn't know she was with—" "She's not with me." He looked at Brielle for the first time. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Say that again, slowly. Tell me what you were about to say." Brielle's mouth closed. "You put your hand on a pregnant woman," Damien said. "In my lounge. In front of 60 people." He paused. "Where is your father tonight?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Something rippled across Brielle's face that Elena didn't fully understand. Not just embarrassment, but something sharper, fear maybe. The kind that comes from somewhere specific. "He's at the fundraiser," Brielle said. "The harbor benefit." "Call him," Damien said. "Tell him to come here." "Damien, this was a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to—" "Call him." Still even, still quiet. "Now." Brielle looked around the room for support and found none. The people who had been happy to orbit her 30 minutes ago had rearranged themselves with remarkable efficiency. She took out her phone. Damien turned back to Elena. Up close, his composure had a crack in it. Small, controlled, but she could see it. A slight tightening around his eyes. The way he was looking at her face like he was cataloging damage. "Your hand," he said. "It's not deep. Your cheek. I'm fine. Stop saying that. Not unkind. Just flat. Marcus." He raised his voice exactly 1 degree. The shift manager materialized from the edge of the crowd with the speed of someone who had been waiting for this moment. Get her coat. Call Reyes and tell him to bring the car to the south entrance. Do it now. Yes, sir. I don't need... Elena started. You took a fall at 7 months. His voice dropped, and for one fractured second something moved behind his eyes that was not the expression of a business owner or a crime lord or a man managing a situation. It was something rawer than that. You need to be looked at, not in an ER where anyone can find you, somewhere quiet. The way he said it, somewhere quiet, made the hair on the back of her neck rise. He knew she'd been hiding. He already knew. The car was a black SUV with tinted windows and a driver who had the physical build and conversational style of a man who had been professionally trained to notice everything and say nothing. His name was apparently Reyes. He held the door open, his eyes moving once across the parking lot in a sweep that was too practiced to be casual. And then they were inside and the city was sliding past the windows in rivers of amber and white light, and Elena sat with her bleeding hand wrapped in the bar towel. Someone had pressed into it and tried to remember how to think. Damien sat across from her, not beside her. Some calculation there, she thought. Distance she had not asked for, but that she understood. A gesture toward her comfort or toward his own restraint, or both. Neither of them spoke for 2 full minutes. You changed your name, he finally said. Yes. Elena Marsh. For 7 months. She looked at her hand. How long have you known? Tonight. He paused. I didn't have anyone looking for you. I need you to know that. I don't know what I need to know from you right now. He accepted that without comment. Outside, Chicago moved past them. The lake somewhere to the east, invisible beyond the buildings, a cold, dark presence she had learned to feel rather than see since moving here. She had come to Chicago specifically because it was his city, which was the kind of decision that only made sense in the math of desperation. The logic being, the safest place to hide from a man's enemies is somewhere those enemies wouldn't dare look. She had been right, for a while. The clinic is on Michigan Avenue, Damien said. Dr. Soria runs it. She's good. She'll be discreet. I don't have insurance that covers... Elena. She looked at him. I'm not going to let you negotiate that sentence. She looked away. Outside, a bridge passed overhead. The city kept moving, indifferent. I'm not your responsibility, she said. No, he agreed. And then, but you were Adrian's wife. The name landed like the hand pressed flat against an open wound. She felt it in her sternum, felt it pull her forward slightly the way grief does when it catches you unprepared, and she pressed her good hand against her stomach and breathed through it. 7 months and 3 days, the baby shifted under her palm. Adrian Voss had been 29 years old when the car bomb killed him. He had been driving Damien's car, wearing a jacket that could have been mistaken for Damien's in the dark, on a route that had been leaked to exactly the right people. He had died at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in March, on a bridge over the Chicago River, in a fire that took 3 hours to put out. Elena had been 14 weeks pregnant. She had identified what remained of her husband with his dental records. He saved my life, Damien said quietly. I know you know that, and I know you know what it cost. What I know, she said carefully, is that Adrian worked for you. He made choices that put him in that car. He made those choices because he loved you like a brother and because you were family to him, and I respected that. I understood it. But when he died, she stopped, started again. When he died, I needed to disappear from your world, not because of you, because of what your world is, because I had this. She pressed her hand harder against her stomach. I had this, and I needed it to be safe. Damien was quiet for a long time. Okay, he finally said. Okay? Okay, I hear you. He looked out the window. His jaw was tight. That doesn't mean you were safe. Dr. Soria was a compact, efficient woman in her 50s who met them in a private corridor and asked exactly 0 questions about why a heavily pregnant woman was arriving at midnight with a billionaire crime lord and a bleeding hand. She spoke to Elena in a calm, direct manner that immediately established that this interaction was between a doctor and her patient, and that any other parties present were welcome to wait outside. Damien waited outside. Elena watched him through the glass of the examination room door. He stood in the hallway with his hands in his pockets, his back to the wall, his eyes moving over the corridor in that same steady sweep she'd seen from Reyes earlier. She wondered if men like him ever fully stopped watching, if that vigilance ever turned off, or if it had simply become the natural state of a person who had spent 20 years with enemies. The ultrasound took 8 minutes. The baby was fine, measuring perfectly, heartbeat strong, positioned well. The wrist Dr. Soria had been more worried about than the hand proved to be only bruised. The cheek was already darkening into what would be a spectacular bruise by morning, but the skin hadn't broken. "You need to rest," Dr. Soria said, and her voice carried the particular weight of a woman who knows the person she's speaking to will not fully comply. "Your blood pressure is slightly elevated. Not dangerous, but worth monitoring. I'll send the results to your OB." "I don't have an OB." Dr. Soria's expression did not change. "You do now. I'll have my office contact you in the morning." Elena dressed slowly and went back into the hallway. Damien looked at her, then at Dr. Soria. A question passed between them in a glance that excluded Elena entirely, a language of long familiarity, and Dr. Soria gave a minimal nod that Elena interpreted as, "She's fine." He exhaled once. Something in his shoulders released, fractionally, by an amount most people probably wouldn't have noticed. Elena noticed. "Baby's okay?" he said. "Baby's okay." He nodded. Then he turned to lead the way back toward the exit, and Elena followed him. And it wasn't until they were back in the SUV moving through the late-night streets that she realized she had not asked where they were going. She asked. "My estate," he said. "You can have a room on the East Wing. You won't have to see me if you don't want to. I have people there around the clock. It's the safest—" "Damien," she kept her voice level, "I'm not going to your house. Your apartment is on the market." He said it calmly. "Your landlord filed an eviction notice 6 weeks ago for non-payment. You've been staying at the Hargrove Residential Hotel on Walker since the 1st of the month. Room 412. Your coworker Sophia has been covering your shifts when the hip pain gets bad enough that you can't stand for 4 hours. You have, I'm estimating based on what I know about those shifts, maybe 3 weeks of savings left before you can't make rent." The silence in the car was absolute. "You said you weren't looking for me," Elena said. "I wasn't." He was still looking straight ahead. "My people monitor certain areas of Chicago as a matter of course. When I recognized you tonight, I made some calls during the drive here. I'm sorry. I needed to understand what I was dealing with." "I'm not something for you to deal with." "No, you're not." He finally looked at her. "You're someone I failed, and I'm trying to fix that." "You didn't—" "Your apartment rent was raised 4 times in 6 months," he said. The evenness of his voice was gone now, replaced by something quieter and harder. "The laundry on Paulina, where you used to work, burned down in October. Your friend Marcy's salon was hit with a health code violation in November and closed indefinitely. The temp agency you registered with in January, they lost their license. One after another, Elena. Every single foothold you had." She was very still. "That's not bad luck," he said. "What is it?" But she already knew. She could feel the answer moving up through her like cold water, filling spaces she hadn't known were empty. "Victor Moreau," he said. She knew the name. Anyone who had spent significant time in proximity to Damien's world knew that name, even tangentially, even through the careful omissions and half-sentences of a husband who tried to leave his work at the door. Victor Moreau ran the other half of Chicago, not the financial half, not the corporate-facing operations Damien had cultivated over 15 years. Victor ran the things that couldn't be made legitimate, the supply chains, the territories, the kind of business that left bodies. They had coexisted in a state of managed hostility for years, neither willing to move first, neither willing to cede ground. "He's been mapping you," Damien said, "not to hurt you, to find the right moment to use you." "Use me for what?" "For this." His voice was careful, measured. "For exactly what happened tonight. He needed me to find you in a vulnerable enough state that I couldn't walk away. He needed me to feel the obligation, because obligation makes people predictable, and predictable people make mistakes." Elena stared at him. "He engineered the whole thing," she said. "It wasn't really a question." "I think so. I don't have proof yet, but the pattern—" He shook his head. "This wasn't random. Brielle Ashcroft didn't wander into my lounge by accident tonight. What does Brielle have to do with her father? Damien said. Gerald Ashcroft. He paused. Outside, the lakefront was appearing through gaps between buildings, the black water of Lake Michigan visible in slivers between towers. Gerald and I had a business relationship, Damien said. Freight and shipping. His company moves cargo through 3 Great Lakes ports. Some of that cargo moves for me. It's a financial arrangement that benefits both of us. He stopped. Or it was. 4 years ago, Adrian flagged something. He thought someone inside our operation was leaking route information, security details, who was going where, when. He spent almost a year tracking it. Damien's hands, Elena noticed, had tightened on his knee. Not a fist, just pressure. He found it 3 weeks before he died. Car had slowed. They were at a light. The city hummed around them. Gerald was selling information to Victor, Damien said. Shipping schedules, security routes, the kind of thing that, if you wanted to build a bomb and put it under the right car, you'd need. The light changed. The car moved. Adrian found the evidence, Elena said slowly. He brought it to me. We were going to confront Gerald. We agreed to do it together, the following weekend. He paused. Adrian was killed that Tuesday. The silence stretched. Someone told Victor that Adrian had the evidence, she said. Yes. Gerald. That's what I believe. His voice was stone. Gerald sold him the information that got Adrian killed, and then he sold him the security route for the car Adrian was driving that night, and he told himself it was business, and he went to whatever fundraiser he attends and shook hands with the mayor and went home to sleep. Elena was quiet for a long time. Why are you telling me this now? She finally asked. Because tonight changes things. He looked at her directly. Victor has been maneuvering towards something. Tonight may have been part of it, or it may have accelerated whatever he's planning. Either way, you're not safe at the Hargrove, and you were clearly not safe at the Blackstone. He paused. I need you somewhere I can protect you. And what do you need in return? It wasn't quite accusatory, but it wasn't nothing. Nothing, he said. Flat, final. She studied his face. He held still and let her. The room they gave her at the Vale Estate was on the second floor of the East Wing, overlooking a snow-dusted garden and beyond a line of bare-branched trees, the dark edge of Lake Michigan. It was large without being ostentatious, furnished in clean lines and muted colors. Someone with taste had made decisions about this space without cluttering it. The bed was wider than her entire hotel room. A woman named Calla appeared with tea and a first aid kit, and the particular efficiency of someone who has handled stranger situations than this without commentary. She redressed Elena's hand. She asked if Elena needed anything else. Elena said no. Calla left. Elena stood at the window in the dark with her hand on her stomach and looked at the lake. She was trying to feel afraid. Fear was the rational response. She was in the home of a man who ran a criminal organization, a man who had just told her that her husband's death was not an accident so much as a transaction, a man who was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read and didn't know how to trust. But the fear wouldn't come, not fully. What came instead was something more complicated, a kind of terrible relief, the relief of a person who has been alone with something too heavy for too long and has finally set it down in a place where they can stop moving. She had been so tired. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and let herself be tired for a moment. Just a moment. The baby moved, a small flutter, something gentle and persistent, and she straightened up. Downstairs she could hear the low murmur of voices. Damien and one of his people probably. Something being arranged, plans being made. She had not planned to go downstairs. She had gone to find the bathroom and misjudged the layout of the East Wing and ended up in a corridor that opened onto a mezzanine overlooking the main floor, and she was standing in the dark without having announced herself when she heard the conversation below. 2 voices. Damien and a man she didn't recognize, or older, from the sound of him, sharp. Moreau's people were already outside the lounge tonight, Damien, not watching, waiting. I know. If Brielle had not caused the scene when she did, if you hadn't gone to her, I know, Damien said again. Something in his voice had changed from the careful composure she'd heard in the car. This was different, harder, stripped of the management that he'd maintained in her presence. They would have had her before she made it to the parking lot. Kidnap? A pause. I don't know if they would have stopped there. The silence after that was the kind that has weight to it. So the scene was staged, the older man said. Brielle didn't know it. Victor knew her father, knew she'd be there, knew how she behaves in those spaces. He set the conditions and let her volatility do the rest. And then he expected you to do exactly what I did. Something like a dry, humorless exhale. He expected me to find her, take her somewhere safe, become invested, and then he uses that to maneuver me. He's creating a pressure point. Because of Adrian. Because of Adrian. Another pause. She knows about Gerald, the older man said. Not a question. I told her tonight. Was that wise? Silence. Probably not, Damien said, and then, more quietly, in a register she had not heard from him before. She has a right to know why her husband died. Elena stood in the dark corridor with her hand pressed flat against her sternum and felt something shift in her chest with the slow grinding weight of continental plates. She had been running from Damien Vale for 7 months, through grief and pregnancy and poverty and the kind of desperate exhaustion that hollows you out from the inside. She had been afraid of his world, of what it would ask of her, of what it would cost. She had never considered that the danger she was running from was not him, that it was already waiting for her outside every door she had thought was safe. She went back to the room. She lay down on the wide bed in her clothes and stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of the lake outside. Distant, constant, indifferent to everything that had happened tonight and everything that was still coming. Her cheek still ached where Brielle's palm had connected. Her hip was a dull, steady burn. Her hand throbbed beneath the bandage. And beneath her ribs, slow and steady, the baby moved. Adrian's son. She was certain it was a son. She had not confirmed it, had refused the gender reveal as a form of superstition she couldn't quite name, but she knew. The same way she had known Adrian was in trouble in the weeks before his death. Something wordless and cellular, information her body held before her brain could process it. She was carrying Adrian Voss's son into a war she had only just begun to understand the edges of. She closed her eyes. In the morning, she told herself. In the morning, she would decide what to do, whether to stay, whether to trust, whether this estate and this man and his careful distance and his 2 knowing eyes represented sanctuary or the deepest danger she had ever walked into. She told herself she would decide in the morning. She was asleep in 4 minutes. What woke her was not a sound from inside the house. It was the absence of sound. A sudden, complete stillness that pressed against the windows and made the hair on her arms rise before she had any idea why. She sat up. The room was dark. The clock on the bedside table read 3:17 a.m. The lake outside the windows was invisible. The garden was invisible. There was a light moving through the trees, not steady. Intermittent. The kind of light a person makes when they're trying not to be seen, moving through dark space with a small device, and the trees are not quite thick enough. Elena sat very still and watched the light move. Then she heard from somewhere below her, through the floor, through the walls, conducted by the bones of the building, the crisp 3-syllable burst of what she knew, without ever having heard it before in her life, was a radio being keyed. Someone was outside, and someone inside the house already knew. She was reaching for the lamp on the bedside table when her door opened. Damien stood in the doorway with his jacket off and a phone in his hand, and the particular expression of a man who has just done the math and doesn't like the sum. "Get dressed," he said. We're moving you to the interior rooms. Now." He held the door wider. His eyes moved to the window. "Don't turn on the lamp." Elena swung her legs off the bed. "Damien." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Tell me what's happening." He looked at her for a long moment across the dark room. "Victor's people aren't outside the Blackstone Lounge anymore," he said. The cold started somewhere at the base of her spine and moved upward. "They're outside this house," he said. The hallway outside her room was already different. Elena noticed it before she fully registered what she was seeing. 2 men who had not been there when she'd gone to bed, positioned at either end of the corridor, with the particular stillness of people who had been trained to become part of the architecture. Not pacing, not checking phones, just present-oriented, their attention distributed across every angle, the way water distributes across a surface it's filling. One of them glanced at her as Damien moved her out of the doorway, and then looked away, because she was not the threat he was monitoring. Damien kept his hand at the small of her back without touching her, close enough that she could feel the heat of it, guiding her direction without contact. She registered the precision of that, the care in it, and filed it somewhere she didn't have time to examine. "Interior staircase," he said quietly. "Third door on your left." She found it. He was one step behind her the whole way. The room they moved her into was on the first floor. No exterior windows, which should have felt more frightening and instead felt like the first breath she'd managed to take fully since waking. There was a couch, a table with a lamp already on. A woman Elena hadn't met before sat in the corner with a laptop and headphones around her neck, looking up when they entered with the flat, assessing gaze of someone who classified people by threat level as a professional habit. "Reyes has eyes on the east perimeter," the woman said without preamble. "Two confirmed, possibly a third at the service entrance." "Weapons?" "One visible. The third position is dark, no visual confirmation yet." Damien nodded once. "Tell Reyes nothing moves until I say." "He knows." Damien looked at Elena. She was standing in the middle of the room with her arms crossed over her stomach. Not a defensive posture, just pressure. The instinct to keep her hands close to the baby. He registered it. Something moved across his face and was gone. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing." "Elena." The same flat delivery he'd used in the car. Not a request exactly, more like a door that only opened one way. She sat. He pulled a chair to face her and sat in it, forearms on his knees, hands loosely linked. The controlled posture of a man managing the distance between what he was feeling and what he was showing. "They're not here to breach," he said. "This is surveillance. Victor wants to know what I'm doing with you." "You sound confident about that." If they were here to breach, they'd have done it before 3 a.m., and they would have used more than 3 people. He said it without heat, factual. "This is reconnaissance. He wants to see if I move you, where I put you, whether I care enough to reorganize around you." "Whether you do." He met her eyes. "Yes." The words sat between them. The woman in the corner, Damien had called her Torres at some point, Elena caught the name, was murmuring something into a radio headset, tracking something on the laptop screen with one finger. The room hummed with the specific frequency of controlled alertness, of people doing their jobs under conditions designed to produce panic, choosing not to panic. Elena watched Damien's hands. They were very still. "You're going to do nothing," she said. "You're going to let them watch. For tonight. And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow I know more than I know now." He unlinked his hands and sat back. "Victor wants a reaction. I'm not going to give him one on his timeline." She studied him. The lamp threw shadows across the lines of his face. He looked tired, not physically, exactly, but the kind of tired that lives deeper than the body. The kind that settles into a person when they have been managing impossible things for too long and have become so good at it that most people can't see it. Adrian had spoken of him in exactly those terms, once. In the second year of their marriage, on a night when Adrian had come home late and sat at the kitchen table with his jacket on and his hands flat against the surface, and she had not asked what happened. He had said, without being asked, "Damien carries things nobody should have to carry alone. And he never lets you help him." She had thought about that sentence many times since March. "I want to know something," she said. "Ask it." "The night Adrian died." She kept her voice level. It cost her. "You knew it was supposed to be you in that car." "Yes." "Did you know before or after?" The question settled into the room like a stone into deep water. Torres had gone very still at her corner, though her eyes stayed on the laptop. "After," Damien said. "How long after?" 40 minutes. His jaw was tight. "I was supposed to be at a meeting. Adrian offered to take the car because he knew I was running late and he thought he could clear the route faster." He paused. "I said yes." She looked at him. "I said yes," he said again. Not louder, just more deliberate. The act of a man making himself repeat something he has already said to himself 10,000 times in the dark. And then 35 minutes later, my phone rang. The silence was long enough to become its own thing. I've thought about that, yes, every single day, he said. If you want to know that. If it matters. It doesn't change anything, she said. No. But it matters. She heard herself say it, hadn't fully decided to. It matters that you carry it. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not gratitude exactly. More like the expression of a person who has been underwater and has just broken the surface and isn't quite sure yet if they're allowed to breathe. Then Torres said, "Movement on the east perimeter," and the moment closed like a door. The movement turned out to be nothing, or rather, it was Victor's people pulling back, which was either a good sign or a sign that they'd gotten what they came for and were done. Reyes reported it at 4:40 a.m. Damien acknowledged it, spoke briefly with someone on the phone in a low voice Elena couldn't fully follow, and then the level of tension in the house shifted down one register. Still present, still coiled, but no longer at the edge of action. Torres stayed at her post. Damien came back to the room and looked at Elena on the couch. "You should sleep," he said. "I won't." "I know." He sat back in the chair. "Then just rest." She adjusted her position on the couch, tucking her legs up as best she could at 7 months, which was a considerable engineering challenge. He watched her do it with an expression she didn't have the energy to analyze. Then he looked at the wall. They stayed like that for a while. "Tell me about Adrian," he said finally. His voice was different, quieter, less structured. Before. Tell me something I don't know." She thought about it. "He used to cook on Sunday mornings," she said. "He was terrible at it. He knew exactly one recipe and he made it every week regardless of what we had in the kitchen. Eggs, whatever vegetables were going bad, hot sauce. He called it a frittata. It was not a frittata." She heard something shift in Damien's breathing. Not a laugh exactly, something that wanted to be. "He told me he could cook," Damien said. "He told everyone he could cook." She paused. "He was good at convincing people of things he believed about himself." "He was the best liar I ever met," Damien said, and the fondness in it was so unguarded that it stopped her. "I mean that as a compliment. In this work, the ability to make someone believe you completely, it's everything. Adrian could walk into a room full of people who had every reason to distrust him and leave with all of them thinking he was their oldest friend." "I know," she said. "He did it to me first." Damien looked at her. "We met at a courthouse," she said. "He was there for reasons he didn't fully explain. I was there for a parking dispute. He convinced me the parking dispute wasn't worth my time and that I should come get coffee instead. I did. I was 24 and I thought he was the most—" She stopped. "I thought he was the most certain person I'd ever met. Like he'd already decided every important question and the rest was just details." "That was real," Damien said. "That wasn't performance." "I know," she said again, more quietly. The lamp flickered once. Somewhere in the house, something settled. Timber or pipes, the organic sound of an old building breathing. "He would have been a good father," Damien said. She pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling. "Yes," she said. "He would have." Morning came in increments. Gray light pressing at the edges of a door that had no windows. Torres changed shifts with a man Elena hadn't met, compact and quiet, who positioned himself in the corner with the same professional absence of his predecessor. Coffee appeared from somewhere. Real coffee, not the institutional kind, and Elena drank it slowly with both hands wrapped around the cup and thought about the shape of the day ahead. At 7, Damien's phone rang. He answered it in this corridor. She could hear the sound of his voice, but not the words. The call lasted 4 minutes. When he came back in, his face had changed. Not dramatically. A degree of stillness that hadn't been there before. The kind that meant something had been confirmed that he had been hoping to disprove. "What?" she said. He sat down. "Gerald Ashcroft called me this morning," he said. She waited. "He wants a meeting." Damien turned the phone over in his hand once, twice. He said he's prepared to— His word was, make amends. "Amends," she said flatly. "He said he's been carrying information about Victor, about the arrangement. He says he wants to come in and give it to me in person." "And you believe him?" Damien looked at her directly. "No." "Then why are you telling me?" "Because his call this morning came 30 minutes after Victor's people left my perimeter." He set the phone on the table. That's not a coincidence. Elena worked through it. It wasn't difficult to follow. The logic was ugly but clean. Victor pulls his surveillance team back, which signals something to Gerald, and Gerald calls Damien immediately after, and the timing is either a warning or a setup dressed as one. Victor wants Gerald to come here, she said. Or Victor wants me to go to Gerald. He rubbed the back of his neck. Either way, Gerald is the next move on the board. What are you going to do? I'm going to meet him. He said it before she could argue. Not here, not on his ground, somewhere I control. He could be. He is. He's absolutely carrying information. The question is whose information? Whether what he brings me is what Victor wants me to have. She stared at him. You're going to let Victor feed you false intel through Gerald to see what he wants you to believe. He looked at her with a kind of measured attention she found difficult to read. Adrian said you were smart, he finally said. Adrian said I was terrifying, she said. There's a difference. The corner of his mouth moved, almost. Both, he said. Gerald Ashcroft arrived at noon. Not at the estate. Damien was precise about that. The meeting happened at a building on South Michigan that belonged, through 3 layers of corporate structure, to one of Damien's legitimate holdings. A conference room on the 14th floor. Spare, clean, the kind of space designed to strip a meeting down to its essential elements. 2 parties, a table, whatever is said between them. Elena was not there. She was told she was not there for her own safety, which she accepted because it was probably true. She was also not there because, she suspected, Damien understood that her presence in the same room as Gerald Ashcroft would introduce variables he couldn't manage. She found she didn't mind the logic. She found out what happened through Reyes, who told her in the flat, edited manner of someone providing a situation report. Facts, sequence, outcome, nothing speculative. Gerald had come in looking like a man who had not slept. He was 61, silver-haired, the kind of physical presence that read as authority even when the authority was clearly crumbling. He sat across from Damien and he put a folder on the table, and for 3 minutes he talked about regret in the language of men who are good at sounding like they're confessing without actually accepting consequence. Damien let him finish. Then Damien asked him one question. Reyes said he didn't know what the question was, that Damien had asked him to step out for that part. What he knew was what happened after. Gerald had gone pale enough that Reyes, through the glass, had briefly wondered if he was having a cardiac event. And then Gerald had talked for 45 minutes without stopping. Elena was sitting in the interior room with her hands flat on her knees when Damien came back to the estate at 2 in the afternoon. He walked in and looked at her and set his jacket over the back of a chair and sat down and was quiet for a moment. The car bombing, he said. Yes. Gerald confirmed it, all of it, the route information. The timing, what he gave Victor and what he received in exchange. He paused. He also told me something I didn't know. She waited. Victor didn't order the bomb for me that night, Damien said. Something careful had entered his voice. He ordered it for Adrian. The room was very still. Adrian's evidence, Damien said. Victor knew he had it. Victor knew I would act on it once Adrian brought it to me, so he didn't try to stop me. He tried to stop Adrian. He needed the evidence buried and Adrian gone before the meeting could happen. Elena heard herself breathing, heard the thin, deliberate sound of it. The car was meant for Adrian, she said. Yes. He wasn't collateral. The word felt wrong in her mouth. Inadequate. Victor specifically targeted him. The leaked route, the timing, all of it. It was designed for Adrian, not me. He held her gaze. I was never the intended target. I've spent a year believing I was the reason Adrian died, and I was wrong. She stood up. She didn't know why. The body sometimes moves before the mind catches up, does things that are about needing space, needing air, needing something to do with the physical self, while the interior world is rearranging itself with the slow, grinding finality of tectonic plates. She walked to the far wall, put her hand against it, breathed. Adrian had found the evidence. Adrian had gone to Damien. Adrian had been killed not because he was in the wrong place, not because of a mistake of timing or a jacket left in a car, but because Victor Moreau had looked at him and calculated that he was the one who needed to disappear. Her husband, had been murdered for knowing the truth. Elena, Damien's voice behind her. Not close. He'd stayed in his chair, giving her the space to have this somewhere he couldn't see her face. She appreciated that more than she could have explained. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady. She willed it to be steady, and it obeyed. Okay. Gerald's confession is recorded. Full disclosure. I have his voice on it admitting the root leak, the information sale, and his knowledge of the target. He paused. It's not the kind of evidence that goes to a police station. No, she said. I know, but it's leverage, and it tells me everything I need to know about where Victor is vulnerable. She turned around. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the careful management, not the calibrated composure. Something underneath all of that, something that had been held in place for a long time by sheer disciplined force and was pressing against the surface now. There's something else Gerald told me, Damien said. His voice had changed again, back to that stripped, quieter register. Victor's next move isn't about me, he said. It's about you. She felt it, in the base of her spine, in the place where the cold had started the night before. Gerald didn't know the details, Damien said, but Victor had a conversation with someone in Gerald's presence 2 weeks ago. About Elena Marsh, about the baby. He stopped. About what would happen to Adrian Voss's son if Damien Vale became distracted. The word landed with the precision of something thrown with intention. She pressed her hand against her stomach. He's not going to touch you, Damien said. The quietness in his voice had an edge in it now. Not rage exactly, something past rage. Something that had burned long enough to become something harder and colder and more permanent. I need you to hear that, not as a reassurance, as a fact. She looked at him. He was sitting very still, hands loose on the table, and his eyes were on her with an intensity that had nothing managed in it anymore. No performance, no calibration, just the direct, unmediated thing, whatever it was, that had been there since he'd knelt beside her on the marble floor of the Blackstone Lounge and gone pale at the sight of her face. She had known, on some level, since the car. Since the way he said Adrian's name, since the way his shoulders had released by a fraction when Dr. Soria told him the baby was fine. She had not wanted to know it. She looked at him now and knew it anyway. You loved him, she said. Adrian. Yes. And you? She stopped, started again. For how long? The question was not fully formed. He understood it anyway. Long enough that it doesn't matter when it started, he said. Long enough that it's not something I'm going to say out loud right now, in this room, with everything that's happening, because you deserve better than that. She looked at the wall, the lamp, the table, the coffee cup she'd been holding for an hour. She looked back at him. Victor is going to move, she said. Yes. Soon, within the week, maybe less. Gerald's meeting with me will get back to him. He'll know the position is shifting. He waited. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly. Ask. Can you stay? His voice was very quiet. Not because I'm asking you to trust me, not because you owe me anything, but because leaving right now, going anywhere on your own, is the most dangerous thing you could do. She thought about the hotel room on Wacker, the lock that rattled, the paper walls, the savings she had enough of for 3 weeks. She thought about 7 months of running, erasing, surviving alone. She thought about a light moving through dark trees. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Something in his face changed. Relief, maybe. Or something that didn't have a clean name. There's one more thing, he said. His voice had changed again. Back to the operational register, but with something strained underneath it, like a beam that's holding weight it was not designed for. Torres ran a full trace on Gerald's timeline tonight, going back further than the bombing, further than Adrian. How far back? 18 months before Adrian found the evidence. He picked up his phone, set it down again. Gerald wasn't just selling shipping route information, Elena. He looked at her steadily. He was the person who introduced Victor to the 3 men who built the bomb. She stared at him. He didn't just leak the route, Damien said. He sourced the weapon. The silence that followed was the kind that restructures the room around it. Everything the same and nothing the same. She sat back down on the couch. Her hip ached, her cheek ached. The baby moved low and slow beneath her ribs. He built it, she said. The words felt strange in her mouth. Gerald Ashcroft built the thing that— He built it, she said. The words felt strange in her mouth. Gerald Ashcroft built the thing that killed my husband. The sentence completed itself in the air between them and stayed there. Damien didn't look away from her. He held her gaze with the particular steadiness of someone who has delivered bad news before and has learned that flinching from the aftermath is a form of cowardice. He let her have the full weight of it, didn't try to soften the edges or redirect toward what came next. She sat with it for a long time. Her hands were very still on her knees. The baby had gone quiet. That deep, oceanic stillness of a child in sleep, unaware of everything accumulating in the room above it. She was aware of her own breathing, the slight unevenness of it, the way the air felt thicker than it had 60 seconds ago. "Where is he now?" she said. "Downstairs, in the secure room." She looked up. "You brought him here." "He came willingly." Damien's voice was flat. "He thinks cooperation buys him something." "Does it?" A pause that was not quite an answer. "Damien." Her voice had an edge in it she hadn't planned. "Does it buy him something?" "It bought him tonight," he said. "What it buys him after that depends on what else he knows." She stood up for the second time in 10 minutes. This time she didn't go to the wall. She stood in the center of the room with her arms at her sides and looked at him with an expression that she could feel on her own face. Something that had moved past grief and was now operating in a register she didn't have a prior name for. Something colder than anger, more structural. "I want to talk to him," she said. "No." "Damien." "Elena." He stood too, and the room suddenly felt smaller. Not threatening. He wasn't moving toward her, just present, full height. "I understand why you want that. I'm telling you it's not going to happen tonight. Source the bomb that killed my husband. He sat across from you this morning and used the word amends. He is in this building right now, and you are telling me." "I'm telling you that you are 7 months pregnant, you took a fall last night, your blood pressure was elevated 6 hours ago, and Gerald Ashcroft is not going anywhere." His voice had not risen. It was the evenness of it that she found hardest to argue against. Not authority exactly, but something more difficult. The voice of someone who is right for the wrong reasons. "When this is over, when it's safe, whatever you need to say to him, I will make sure you have the chance. But not tonight." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat back down. Not because he was right exactly, because her hip was screaming and her hands had begun to shake in a way she didn't want him to see. She did not sleep again. She lay on the couch in the interior room with the lamp on low and listened to the building around her. The periodic murmur of voices from down the hall, Rhea's on the radio twice. The sound of footsteps that moved with purpose rather than restlessness. The house was awake. Whatever machinery Damien operated, it was running. At some point before dawn, Torres appeared in the doorway with a phone. "He needs you to hear something," she said. Elena took the phone. It was a recording. Audio only, the quality thin but clear. The kind of capture made from a device in a room, ambient, capturing everything including the sound of a chair shifting and the distant noise of traffic far below. She recognized Gerald Ashcroft's voice within the first 10 seconds. The cadence of it, the particular register of a man accustomed to rooms that listened to him. He was speaking to someone. Not Damien, someone else. The call must have happened after the meeting, after Gerald had returned to wherever he was staying. She pressed the phone harder against her ear. Gerald said, "He took it well. Better than I expected." A voice on the other end, distorted and unrecognizable. "What did you give him?" "Everything we discussed. The route information, the timing, the sourcing detail." A pause. "He recorded it. I made sure he knew I knew that." "And the woman?" Elena stopped breathing. "He has her at the estate," Gerald said. "East Wing, from what I could tell from Brielle's description last night. He's moved security, reorganized his perimeter team. He's deeply invested." Another pause. "More than I expected, honestly. Victor was right about that." "When does it move?" 3 days. Maybe 2. If Damien responds the way Victor thinks he will. Gerald's voice shifted. Something almost like discomfort in it. Not quite conscience, more like the sound of a man who has done something he prefers not to examine too closely. "The woman shouldn't be there when it happens. Tell Victor that. She's irrelevant at this point. Whatever he's planning for her, that's not your concern. I'm making it my concern. Gerald's voice sharpened. The child is Adrian Voss's. Victor knows that. There's no value in... Gerald. The distorted voice went flat. You sourced the material. You provided the route. You made the call this morning. You are not in a position to negotiate what happens to who. Silence. 3 days, the voice said. Be ready to move when I contact you. The call ended. Elena lowered the phone. Torres was watching her from the doorway with the careful neutrality of someone who has delivered bad news before and is waiting to see how the recipient processes it. Gerald's confession this afternoon, Elena said. Her voice was remarkably steady. She noted that with a kind of distant curiosity. It was staged. Yes. Victor told him what to confess, what to give Damien, what to make him believe. We think so. To maneuver Damien into a specific response. She was working it out as she spoke, the pieces assembling with a terrible mechanical logic. Gerald comes in, gives up just enough. The bombing, the route, the sourcing, enough to make Damien feel like he's winning, like the picture is complete. And Damien spends the next 72 hours organizing his response to information that Victor designed for him. Torres said nothing, which was its own answer. Elena looked at the phone in her hand. Where's Damien? Conference room. He's been there since... Take me to him. Was. He was standing at the window when she came in, phone to his ear, and he turned when the door opened and held up one finger. The gesture of a man in the middle of something that can't be interrupted. She sat down and waited. The city below was moving into the gray pre-dawn traffic of a Thursday, indifferent and enormous, and he stood silhouetted against it while he finished the call with clipped, directed instructions to whoever was on the other end. Names she didn't know, addresses she didn't recognize, deadlines she couldn't evaluate. He hung up, looked at her, read her face. You heard the recording, he said. Yes. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, and she saw it then. The thing she hadn't seen clearly before, because he'd been managing it carefully, and she'd been too consumed by her own situation to look hard enough. He was tired. Not the managed exhaustion she'd read last night. Genuinely, structurally tired. The kind that shows in the quality of stillness rather than in fidgeting. The way a person sits when they are conserving something they're running low on. You already knew, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I suspected it when Gerald's call came in this morning. The timing was too clean. He folded his hands on the table. The recording confirmed it. When did you get the recording? 2 hours before Torres brought you the phone. She stared at him. You let me sleep, she said. You let me sleep for 2 hours knowing that Gerald's entire confession was fed to you by Victor Moreau. Her voice did not rise. It went the other direction. Down, flatter, the specific register of a person controlling something that wants very badly to become something else. You made a decision about what I needed to know and when. Yes. He held her gaze. I did. Don't do that again. Elena, I'm not asking. She leaned forward slightly. I am carrying Adrian's child in your house in the middle of whatever this is. Do not manage what I know. Do not decide for me. She paused. I've had enough of that from the world. I won't have it from you. The silence was long. Okay, he said finally. Okay. I'm sorry. She sat back, accepted that. So Victor designed the confession, she said. What does that mean for what you were planning? It means everything I've set in motion in the last 12 hours is based on information Victor wanted me to have. He turned his phone face down on the table. A gesture of focus, she was learning. What he did when he was thinking without the performance of thinking. Financial investigators, I called this morning. The moves I've made on Gerald's holdings. All of it is visible to Victor. All of it is the response he wanted. Then stop. I can't stop. Stopping is also a signal. Then what? She watched his face. If everything you do is being read, if Victor has Gerald inside your response, what do you have that he doesn't know about? He looked at her. She felt something shift in the quality of his attention, the way it focused. There's one thing Gerald doesn't know, Damien said slowly. One piece of information that never went through Gerald's channel, that Victor can't have. What? There's a man inside Victor's operation. Has been for 14 months. He said it carefully. The way you say something you have kept very close for a very long time, and the act of speaking it aloud feels like a physical release. Victor doesn't know he exists. Gerald doesn't know he exists. Adrian knew. He was the one who found him, made the first contact. It was the last thing he set up before he died. The breath she took in was slow and controlled. Adrian found an asset inside Victor's organization, she said. Yes. And he never told you. He was being careful. He didn't want to expose the contact until he had proof of the bombing chain. The contact was the insurance policy. Adrian was going to use him to get the final evidence and then bring both to me at once. He stopped. He ran out of time. How do you know about him then? Adrian left a file. Damien's voice was very even. Not in any system. Physical. Handwritten. He gave it to his attorney with instructions that it be delivered to me if he died under violent circumstances. A pause that lasted long enough to become something. It arrived in April. She closed her eyes. Adrian had been dead for 3 weeks by April. She had been in a hotel room in Milwaukee with her hair cut short and a name she'd found on a rental application form left by a previous tenant. She had been eating crackers and watching the ceiling and trying to remember how to want things. And somewhere in Chicago, a file in Adrian's handwriting had been delivered to Damien Vale. She opened her eyes. You've been running this asset for over a year, she said, carefully, slowly. Victor can't know he exists. And if you activate him now, if I activate him now, I burn him. Victor will find him within days. He dies. The flatness of his voice on those 2 words, the weight carried under them. But if I don't activate him now, Victor moves in 3 days and I'm operating blind. She understood the calculation. She hated the calculation. What does this person know, she said. Everything. The structure of Victor's operation from the inside, safe houses, supply chains, the financial routing. He paused. And who else is on Victor's payroll? Who else? She said it slowly. That's what I don't have yet. He looked at her steadily. Gerald is compromised, obviously, but Gerald is not sophisticated enough to be Victor's only access point into my organization. There's someone else, someone closer. She felt it again, that cold rising thing. Someone in your organization, she said. Yes. Someone who knew you'd be at the Blackstone Lounge last night. Yes. Someone who knew the route the night Adrian... She stopped. He said nothing, which meant yes. The room was very quiet. She thought about the night in March, Adrian taking the car, the route that had been leaked to Victor with enough specificity to place a bomb in exactly the right location at exactly the right time. The kind of precision that required current operational information, not old data, not structural knowledge, but the specific details of a specific night. Someone who knew Damien's movements. Someone inside. You have a name, she said. I have a suspicion. His jaw was tight. I've had it for months. I couldn't move on it without proof. Without proof, it destroys everything. The trust of every other person in this organization, the operational structure, everything. He looked at her. And if I'm wrong, I've destroyed something I can't rebuild. Who is it? He was quiet for a long moment. Then his phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. Something crossed his face. Fast, controlled, but she caught it. A contraction of the features so brief it was almost subliminal. Almost. He picked up the phone, read whatever was on the screen, set it down. Victor's moved his timeline, he said. His voice had gone to somewhere she hadn't heard it before, stripped of everything. It's not 3 days. She stared at him. Torres just intercepted a communication from one of his relay points. He stood up. He's moving tonight. Tonight. Within hours. He was already moving toward the door. I need you to stay in this room. I need you to not move, not open the door for anyone except Reyes or Torres, and I need you to... Damien! She stood up. Her hip screamed. She ignored it. Who's the person inside your organization? He stopped at the door, turned back. And the expression on his face, she had seen grief before. She had seen it in mirrors for 7 months. She knew what it looked like in all its variations. But the specific version she saw on his face in this moment was one she had not seen before. The grief of someone who has just been handed proof of something they have been hoping against all evidence was not true. Reyes just sent me a timestamp, he said quietly, from the night Adrian died. A keycard log from our security system. He stopped. Someone accessed the root server at 9:47 p.m. that Tuesday, pulled the scheduled path for Adrian's car. Who? He looked at her. Reyes, he said. The name landed in the room, and Elena felt the floor shift beneath her feet in a way that was not physical, or was. She couldn't separate them in this moment, the body registering what the mind was still processing, the blood dropping from her face the same way the realization was dropping through her chest. Reyes, who had swept the parking lot last night with the practiced ease of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for, who had driven them to the clinic and positioned them perfectly in the south entrance corridor, who had reported the east perimeter clear at 4:40 a.m., removing the alarm that had kept them on high alert. Who knew exactly where Elena was in this house? Who knew exactly where Damien was in this building, right now, at this moment, because he had just sent the keycard timestamp directly to Damien's phone. He sent you that timestamp on purpose, she said. Her voice was very quiet. He wanted you to see it. Damien's face had gone to stone. He's telling you where he is, she said. He's telling you he's ready. And then from somewhere below them, deep in the bones of the building, in the direction of the secure room where Gerald Ashcroft had been placed, came a sound that was not loud, not dramatic, not anything like what Elena had imagined violence sounded like. Just a single flat concussive crack, followed by silence. The kind of silence that comes after a sound and is different from the silence that precedes it, denser, more deliberate, carrying the weight of whatever the sound has ended. Damien was through the door before Elena had fully processed what she'd heard. She was 2 steps behind him before she'd made a conscious decision to move, her body operating on something older than thought. And then his hand was on her arm. Not rough, but absolute. Stay here. That was a gunshot. Stay here. His eyes were on the corridor. Lock the door behind me. Do not open it. Damien. He looked at her. 1 second. Direct, unmediated, carrying something she didn't have time to name. Then he was gone. She stood in the empty conference room for approximately 4 seconds. Then she looked at the table, at the chair, at the phone he'd left face down on the surface when he stood up, and she picked it up, and she followed him. But the corridor outside was different from what it had been an hour ago. She registered the differences in the way the body registers threat before the mind catches up. The absence of the 2 men who had been positioned at the stairwell entrance, the emergency lighting that had replaced the overhead fluorescents, the faint smell of something chemical and sharp that she couldn't name but that made the inside of her nose contract. She moved along the wall, one hand trailing the surface, her hip a constant burning complaint that she was distributing weight away from without fully being able to. Below her, somewhere in the structure of the building, she could hear movement, fast, multiple sources. The kind of movement that doesn't announce itself. She found the stairwell, started down. She was 3 steps from the bottom when she heard Damien's voice, clipped, directed, coming from the left, and then another voice overlapping it, and then a third that she didn't recognize, and then a sound that was not a gunshot but something related to it, a door being breached, and the controlled chaos of people moving in a space with a purpose she could only partially read from the audio. She reached the bottom of the stairs. The secure room was at the end of a short corridor, its door standing open at an angle that meant it had been pushed hard from the inside. 2 men she didn't recognize were on the floor of the hallway, not visibly hurt, zip-tied at the wrists, which told her Damien's people had moved faster than Victor's people had expected. Gerald Ashcroft was not in the corridor. Damien was standing at the entrance to the secure room with his back to her, and as she came around the angle of the door frame, she saw why. Gerald was in the room. He was alive. Reyes was not. He was on the floor near the far wall with 2 of Damien's men standing over him, his hands behind his back and his face against the concrete, and he was breathing. She could see his back moving, but he was very still in the particular way of someone who has made an assessment of their situation and understood that movement would make it worse. There was blood on the floor near the door, not a pool. A smear, the kind left by someone who had been hit while moving. Not Gerald's, not Reyes's. She scanned the room. Torres was against the right wall with her left hand pressed against her upper arm and her right hand still holding her radio, and the expression on her face was the flat, concentrated look of someone managing pain by refusing to give it priority. "Torres?" Elena said. "I'm fine." Torres's voice was even, through and through. "It's not deep. Sit down." Sit down." Elena crossed to her because the training that had made her a capable nurse before the pregnancy, before the marriage, before everything had not gone anywhere, it had just been waiting, and she took Torres's wrist and moved her good hand away from the wound and looked at it. Clean entry, controlled bleed. Not arterial. Torres was right. Not deep, not immediately dangerous, but it needed pressure and it needed it now. Elena pressed Torres's hand back over it. "Hold that. Hard. I mean hard. I know how to—" "Hold it." Torres held it. Elena straightened up. Damien had not moved from the center of the room. He was looking at Reyes on the floor, and the expression on his face was the one she had seen in the conference room. The grief that had an edge of something past grief in it. Something that had already made its decision. "How long?" he said. His voice was very quiet. Reyes turned his head slightly. His face was bloodless. He had the look of a man who has run the numbers and knows what they add up to. "Damien, how long have you been feeding him information?" Reyes was quiet. "How long?" Still quiet. Still even. Still somehow more frightening for it. 14 months, Reyes said. The number landed in the room like something physical. Damien absorbed it without visible reaction, which was its own kind of reaction. "Before Adrian found the leak," Damien said. "Yes." "You knew Adrian was looking?" "Yes." "You told Victor he had the evidence?" Silence. "Reyes." Damien crouched, not close enough to touch, just reducing the distance, eye level. "You told Victor that Adrian had found the evidence. It wasn't supposed to go that far." Reyes's voice had cracked somewhere in the middle of the sentence. "Victor said he was going to move Adrian out of the picture, relocate him, get him out of Chicago. He said, Damien's voice didn't change. "You believed him." You believed Victor Moreau when he told you Adrian Voss was going to be relocated." The evenness fractured, just slightly, just at the edge of it, like a hairline crack appearing in stone. "You believed that." Reyes had closed his eyes. "What did he give you?" Damien said. "For 14 months. What was worth it?" "My brother has a debt," Reyes said, very quietly, almost inaudible. "A bad one. The kind that people come to collect. Victor said he'd cancel it, said he'd keep us both." "Stop." Damien stood up. He stood very still. "Don't." Reyes went quiet. Damien turned away. He turned toward the door and he saw Elena standing in the door frame, and something moved across his face. Not surprise, he'd probably known she was there, something that was harder to name. The expression of a man who did not want her to see this and understands that he no longer gets to control what she sees. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Victor's people are in the building," he said. "Not the emotional conversation, the operational one. Back to the register he needed to be in. Reyes sent the access signal when he discharged the weapon. It was the breach indicator. Tells Victor's team the perimeter is open." He moved toward the doorway. "We have maybe 4 minutes before the East Service entrance gets hit." "How many?" "Unknown." He looked at the 2 men standing over Reyes. "Cuff him to the pipe. Don't leave him." He looked at the other 2 men in the corridor, still on the floor. "Bring those 2 into this room. Lock it from the outside when you leave." He looked at Gerald. Gerald Ashcroft had not moved from his position in the corner of the room. He was sitting in a chair with his hands in his lap, and the particular stillness of a man who has spent the last 20 minutes watching events accelerate past the point where his participation matters, and has decided that the safest approach is to become furniture. "Gerald," Damien said. Gerald looked at him. "You're going to stay in this room. You're going to be very quiet. And when this is over, you and I are going to finish our conversation." He paused. "All of it. The parts Victor told you to give me, and the parts you're still holding." Gerald nodded. Small. Quick. Damien turned to Elena. "I need you on the 3rd floor," he said. "Interior room, north side, no exterior walls. I'll have 2 people with you." "I'm not going to sit in a room." "Elena." I was a trauma nurse for 4 years. She said it calmly. Torres is losing blood. At least 2 of your people are going to need attention in the next 20 minutes. And you don't have a medic on site tonight because Reyes handled personnel scheduling, and Reyes has been working for Victor for 14 months. She met his eyes. Put me somewhere I can be useful, or I'll find somewhere myself. He looked at her for 3 seconds, which was a long time given what was coming through the East Service entrance. Second floor, he said. The clinic room on the north corridor. It's stocked. Torres goes with you. Torres needs stitches. Torres is going to have to wait 20 minutes for stitches. He was already moving. Can she wait 20 minutes? Elena looked at Torres, who had stood up from the wall and was holding her arm with the expression of someone deeply insulted by the implication that she could not wait 20 minutes. She can wait, Elena said. Damien nodded once, and then he moved, and his men moved with him, and the corridor shifted from a scene of aftermath into something with forward momentum, and Elena put her hand on Torres's good arm and guided her toward the stairwell. The clinic room was exactly what he'd said. A converted office with a lockable door and a medical supply cabinet that someone with genuine knowledge had stocked with the items an organization like Damien's would actually need. Not the decorative first aid kit of a corporate office. Gauze, suture kits, lidocaine, surgical scissors, wound wash, blood pressure cuff, pulse oximeter. Someone had thought about this carefully. Elena thought about who exactly had handled medical supply ordering and decided not to complete that thought. She worked on Torres in focused silence, the older woman sitting backwards on a chair with her jacket off and her arm extended, watching Elena's hands with a professional assessment that eventually softened into something more like trust. He's going to be all right, Torres said. Not a question. I don't know that. He always... Torres. Elena tied off the first layer with a precision that made Torres exhale sharply. I've known him for approximately 36 hours. I don't have a basis for always. Torres was quiet for a moment. Adrian talked about you, she said. Elena's hands continued moving, steady. He talked about you the way people talk about something they've decided they don't get to have, Torres said. Not sad about it, just factual, like he'd put it in a box and labeled it and put the box on a high shelf. A pause. He was a good man. Yes, Elena said. He was. Damien hasn't... Torres stopped, reconsidered. In the time I've worked for him, there's been no one. I want you to understand what I mean when I say that. No one. Not because he hasn't had the opportunity, because he decided something a long time ago, and he's been very disciplined about it. Torres. I know what you're doing. Elena secured the final layer of bandaging, and I appreciate it, but this is not the moment. Below them, something happened. Not the single concussive crack of before. This was different. Multiple sounds, in rapid enough succession that they blurred at the edges, and then voices raised in a way that wasn't quite shouting but was close, and then the particular sound of impact, something large and controlled meeting something that resisted it. Elena and Torres looked at each other. Elena crossed to the door, pressed her ear against it, heard footsteps, running, overhead, on the floor above them. Then silence. Then more footsteps, slower this time, deliberate. Her phone, Damien's phone, still in her pocket, buzzed. She pulled it out. A text from a number she didn't recognize that read, East breach contained. 2 down on their side. Nolan has a graze. She read it again. Then another. Vale is with Moreau. She stopped breathing. She read it a 3rd time. Vale is with Moreau. Not Victor's people. Victor himself. She turned to Torres. He's here. Torres stood up from the chair with her bandaged arm and her jacket off and her radio in her good hand. Where? I don't know. She looked at the phone. Whoever sent this, they're tracking him. She pressed a response. Where? The reply took 11 seconds, felt like longer. Sublevel, parking structure. He went down alone. Alone. Elena looked at the door. Don't, Torres said. He went down alone. He knows what he's doing. Victor moved his timeline. He came here himself, tonight, which means this was never about a breach. It was never about grabbing me or taking out the perimeter. She was already putting on her shoes, which she had removed when she sat down, moving with the economy of someone who has made a decision and is now executing. This was about getting Damien in a room with him. One-on-one, Victor wanted to meet him. That doesn't mean 14 months of access to Damien's operation, Torres. 14 months. Victor doesn't need to blow the building. He needs 5 minutes alone with Damien Vale and whatever Victor knows and whatever leverage Victor has built from 14 months of Reyes feeding him information. She stood up. Her hip was a fire burning from the joint outward. She breathed through it. He's not trying to kill him. He's trying to own him. Torres stared at her. Elena moved to the medical cabinet, opened it, found the lidocaine, the surgical scissors, a syringe, looked at them. Put the scissors in her jacket pocket because she was a practical woman, and the world had spent 7 months educating her about that. You cannot go down there, Torres said. I'm not asking for your permission. Elena looked at her. Can you walk? Of course I can. Then you're coming with me. Stay behind me on the stairs and tell me if anything comes up on the radio. Torres looked at her for a long moment, a measuring look, the kind that takes the full inventory of a person and arrives at an assessment. You're a lot scarier than he made you sound, Torres said. Adrian always undersold things he loved, Elena said, and moved to the door. The parking structure beneath the building was 3 levels deep, and the lowest level was where the building's mechanical systems lived. Generators, water mains, the kind of infrastructure that makes a space loud with ambient noise and visually fragmented by structural columns and low-hanging pipework, and the particular quality of fluorescent light that has aged past its useful life and now produces more shadow than illumination. It was also, Elena understood as she reached the bottom of the stairwell with Torres 3 steps behind her, exactly the kind of space a man like Victor Moreau would choose for a conversation he didn't want witnessed. She heard their voices before she saw them. She stopped at the edge of the stairwell exit, her back against the wall, her hand on Torres's wrist. Still, wait. And she listened. Victor Moreau's voice was not what she had expected. She had built a mental image from Adrian's careful omissions and Damien's measured descriptions, and the voice that reached her from somewhere between the second and third column to the left was quieter than the image. Educated. The particular smoothness of a man who learned very young that the most dangerous version of power doesn't need to announce itself. You should have taken the meeting 2 years ago, Victor was saying, when I offered it, before all of this. You blew up my best friend. Damien's voice. Controlled. A degree of control that was costing him something. There was no meeting after that. Adrian found something he shouldn't have found that created a problem I had to solve. You solved it by killing him. I solved it by removing a threat to a business arrangement that benefited both of us. A pause. You know what your organization makes annually, Damien. You know what mine makes. Neither of us needs a war. Neither of us needs this. Then why are you here? Because you found the woman, because you've reorganized around her, because I needed to know whether this was sentiment or strategy, and I needed to hear it from you directly. Elena didn't breathe. And what does it matter to you, Damien said, which one it is? Because sentiment is manageable and strategy is a problem. Victor paused. The child she's carrying is Adrian's. I know that. I also know what Adrian was to you and what that child represents. Another pause. I'm prepared to guarantee her safety. The child's safety. Full immunity from anything connected to this business. You walk away from the investigation into Gerald. You walk away from the last 14 months. We reset. Silence. In exchange for what? Damien said. In exchange for understanding that certain things are not going to change. That Chicago has a structure that functions, and that you're part of it, and that my part of it is not something you're going to dismantle. Victor's voice had not changed its tone throughout. Patient, almost reasonable. I'm not asking you to work for me. I'm asking you to leave my half of the city alone. You killed Adrian. Yes. You spent 14 months running an asset inside my organization. Yes. You engineered the Blackstone Lounge. You systematically destroyed Elena's life to put her in a position where I'd find her. Yes. Not defensive, not apologetic. The acknowledgement of a man who has organized his worldview in a way that makes all of these things consistent with reasonable behavior. Elena heard Damien exhale, one slow, controlled breath. "No," he said. The word was very quiet. "Damien, no." And now the control in his voice had shifted, not breaking, not dissolving, but changing into something different, something that had been held in place for 24 hours and had reached the end of its tolerance. "You sat across from me at that table tonight through Gerald's voice, and you told me exactly what you wanted me to know, and you waited to see what I'd do with it. You moved Reyes into position. You came here tonight because you thought 14 months of inside access meant you understood how I think, what I value, what I'll trade for safety." A pause. "You don't know me. I know you well enough. You know my routes. You know my schedule. You know my financial structure and my security rotation." His voice was very steady. "You don't know what I'm willing to burn down to end this." The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. Elena felt Torres's hand close around her wrist. Not a warning. Something else, something involuntary, the grip of a person bracing. "That's a very expensive sentence," Victor said. "I know what it costs. The woman, the child, are not leverage." And now there was something in Damien's voice that was not the controlled professional register and was not the raw emotional undercurrent she had heard in private moments. It was something past both of those, something that had been compressed for a very long time under enormous pressure and had finally found the conditions for its release. "Don't say their names. Don't put them in the same sentence as what you're offering me. Don't." And then something happened very fast. A sound, movement, from somewhere to her right, from an angle she hadn't been watching. And Torres pulled her back hard against the wall, and Elena's shoulder hit the concrete, and she bit down on the sound the impact wanted to produce, because Torres was already moving, radio up, saying something clipped and compressed, and from the direction of the voices there was a crash, metallic, something heavy, hitting something structural. And then the specific sound of two bodies in the same space making decisions about each other with the kind of velocity that leaves no room for language. Elena pressed herself against the wall. Her hand was on her stomach. The baby was very still. She made herself breathe. She moved to the edge of the column. What she saw between the third and fourth structural supports of the sub-level parking structure of a building on South Michigan Avenue in Chicago at 4:28 a.m. on a Thursday morning was Damien Vale and Victor Moreau, and the third man who had been positioned behind the column to Elena's right. Victor's, clearly Victor's, the failsafe if the conversation went wrong. And Damien had already closed the distance to the third man with the speed of someone who had seen it coming before Elena had. And the third man was on the ground. And Victor had a weapon in his hand, and Damien was looking at it with a stillness that was the opposite of fear. "You're not going to use that," Damien said, breathing hard, the first time she'd heard his breath change. "You don't know that either," Victor said. "You came here to make a deal. You don't make deals with dead men." He held still. "Put it down, Victor. We're going to finish this conversation." Victor's hand did not move. 3 seconds. 5. Elena stepped out from behind the column. Victor's eyes moved to her. Reflex, involuntary. The movement of a man whose threat assessment has been interrupted by an unexpected variable. And she was 7 months pregnant, and she was standing in a sub-level parking structure at 4 a.m. with surgical scissors in her jacket pocket and Damien's phone in her hand, and she looked at Victor Moreau directly and she said very clearly, "There's a recorded confession from Gerald Ashcroft that names you specifically in the sourcing, timing, and execution of a vehicle bombing that killed Adrian Voss 14 months ago. It's already been transmitted to 3 separate locations outside this building." She kept her voice level. Her hip was screaming. She did not move. "Shoot him, and it goes to every federal contact Damien has by sunrise. Don't shoot him, and we have a conversation about what happens next." Victor stared at her. The weapon didn't move for 3 full seconds. Then Victor Moreau set it on the concrete floor. Not dropped. Set. Deliberately, with the thumb and 2 fingers of a man who understands that how you surrender a thing is as important as whether you surrender it. He kept his eyes on Elena while he did it, which told her something she filed away without fully examining, that she had been the variable he hadn't prepared for, and that whatever calculation he'd run in those 3 seconds had landed on a result that surprised him. Damien crossed the distance in 2 steps and took the weapon off the floor and put it in his jacket without looking at it, his eyes on Victor the entire time. The sub-level hummed around them. Generator noise. Distant pipes. The the specific quality of air that never fully circulates. Thick, slightly chemical, the ambient smell of a building's buried infrastructure. Torres had appeared at Elena's shoulder without announcement, her bandaged arm held close to her body, her good hand holding the radio with the grip of someone who is not planning to need it, but is not planning to not need it either. Elena let herself breathe, one slow breath in, one out. The baby moved, not the distressed, cramped movement of the last hour, but something calmer, a shifting of weight, a small internal adjustment, as though the child had registered the change in the room's atmosphere and found it acceptable. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach and kept her eyes on the two men. "Sit down," Damien said to Victor. Victor looked at the maintenance vehicle against the far wall, old, dust-filmed, clearly unmoved for years, and almost said something about it. She could see it in his face, the reflex of a man who has spent his entire adult life in rooms that confirmed his significance. He swallowed it. He sat. Damien stood. "Gerald," Damien said. Flat. First word of the real conversation. "Mus." Victor didn't flinch exactly, but something rearranged itself behind his eyes, the acknowledgement that the opening was not the one he would have chosen. "Gerald made his own choices," Victor said. "He sourced the material." Damien's voice was even, the particular evenness of something that has been compressed for a very long time under very high pressure. "Walk me through your version of that. I want to hear you say it." "Damien, say it." Victor looked at him for a long moment. "Gerald provided the contact," Victor said finally. "The technical expertise was not his. He made an introduction. The rest was handled by people who are no longer in Chicago and no longer my concern." "The rest," Damien repeated. "The construction, the placement, the timing." "Yes. And the route information." "Gerald had access to your freight scheduling. He used it. He used it to tell you exactly which car Adrian Voss would be driving on a Tuesday night in March." Damien's voice had not changed registers once. That was the frightening thing about it. He used it to put a bomb under the right vehicle at the right bridge at the right time. "And you're telling me that Gerald provided a contact and the rest was handled?" Victor said nothing. "You ordered it," Damien said. "It was a business decision." "Say that again." "It was—" "Say it one more time." And now the register shifted. Finally, the first fracture in the surface, not loud, not explosive, but unmistakable. The sound of something that has been held in place by sheer disciplined force for 14 months and has run out of the kind of patience that was always finite. Adrian Voss was 29 years old. He had been in this city for 6 years. He had never in 6 years taken an action against your organization. He found evidence that someone inside my operation was compromised, and he was going to bring it to me, and you decided that made him a threat, and you had him killed. A pause. "Tell me that was a business decision one more time." Victor held his gaze. He was not, Elena realized, a stupid man. He was not a man who would make the mistake of speaking now. He had the intelligence to understand that what Damien was doing was not losing control, that the shift in his voice was not weakness, but the opposite, was the sound of a man who has already decided the outcome and is giving his opponent one final opportunity to understand what they're facing. Victor understood. He said nothing. Damien reached into his jacket, not for the weapon, for his phone. He unlocked it, pressed something, and set it on the hood of the maintenance vehicle face up between them. "Gerald Ashcroft's full confession," he said, "recorded this afternoon, names you by name 17 times, details the technical sourcing, the route leak, and the specific conversation in which you instructed him to ensure Adrian Voss could not deliver his evidence." He paused. "It's been transmitted to 3 external locations, as Elena told you. It's also been received and acknowledged by a federal contact who has been waiting for actionable material on your operation for 2 years." He picked the phone back up. "What happens next with that material depends entirely on what you do in the next 10 minutes. Victor looked at the phone, looked at Damien, looked, briefly, at Elena across the parking structure. Then he looked back at Damien and did something she hadn't expected. He exhaled. Long, controlled, the breath of a man releasing something he has been carrying for long enough that the act of setting it down feels unfamiliar. "What do you want?" Victor said, not negotiating anymore. "Asking." "Everything," Damien said simply. The financial structure, the supply chain documentation, the names of every compromised official in your network going back 5 years, the accounts, the properties, all of it, signed over, documented, transferred to people I designate. He paused. You walk out of Chicago with what's in your pockets. You don't come back. You don't rebuild. You don't contact anyone still in this city. You become someone who used to matter here and doesn't anymore. You're asking me to disappear. I'm telling you what you're going to do. Damien's voice had returned to its baseline, level, unhurried, the voice of someone for whom this outcome was settled some time ago, and the conversation has simply been the necessary process of arriving at it. The alternative is the federal contact receives the full package tonight, and you spend the rest of your life in a room deciding whether to cooperate with people who will be very interested in everything you know. Victor was quiet for a very long time. The generator hummed. Somewhere above them, in the floors of the building, people were moving, Damien's people, cleaning up the aftermath of the breach, managing the logistics of a night that had produced exactly the kind of controlled chaos that Damien had apparently spent 20 years learning to navigate. My brother is in this city, Victor said finally. Low. The first thing he'd said that sounded like it came from somewhere personal rather than strategic. He has a family, a legitimate life. He's not part of any of this. Damien looked at him. Your brother, he said slowly, is not my problem and never has been. Something shifted in Victor's face. Fractional. The specific micro-expression of a man who has been braced for the worst and has been handed something less than that and doesn't quite know what to do with the difference. He stays out of it, Victor said. That's all I'm asking. He was never in it, Damien said. That's the only thing you've said tonight that I believe without qualification. Victor nodded. Once. The small, definitive nod of a man who has completed a transaction that cost him everything and is now processing what it means to have nothing left to protect. He stood up. Damien stood. They looked at each other across the space between them, two men who had spent years moving around each other at a careful orbit, never quite in the same room until tonight. The entire architecture of their conflict compressed into this moment, in this bad light, in this buried room. And something passed between them that Elena couldn't fully name. Not respect, not quite. Something older and less clean than that. The acknowledgement of two people who have finally occupied the same space and found that it is smaller than either of them expected. The documentation, Damien said. My attorney contacts yours by noon tomorrow. It'll be ready. If it's not complete, it will be complete. Victor's voice had a flatness to it now that was different from the controlled smoothness of earlier. The flatness of someone who has accepted a thing and is no longer performing. I'm not... He stopped. I know when something is finished. He walked toward the stairwell. He passed within 4 feet of Elena. He didn't look at her. She looked at him. At the back of his silver-templed head, at the set of his shoulders, at the way he carried himself even now with the residual posture of a man who has spent decades being significant. And she thought about Adrian. About a Tuesday in March. About a bridge over the Chicago River burning for 3 hours. She said nothing. She let him go. Basam. The building took 2 hours to fully clear. Torres went back to the clinic room and sat with her arm elevated and supervised from a chair, while Elena moved between the men who needed attention with the focused efficiency of someone doing the only thing she is fully certain of in the world. A graze on a man named Nolan who kept apologizing for the inconvenience of his own injury. A bruised rib on another who refused to admit it hurt until she pressed the specific location and he stopped breathing for a second. She worked without talking much, without asking for information she didn't need for the immediate clinical task, and the men let her work with the particular deference of people who understand they are in the presence of someone who knows what they're doing. Damien appeared in the doorway of the clinic room at 5:30. She was packing supplies back into the cabinet with her back to him. She heard his footsteps and knew them, had apparently learned them in 36 hours, the specific weight and cadence of them, which was information she would process later. Nolan's going to need an X-ray, she said without turning. I don't think it's displaced, but I can't confirm that without imaging. The graze on his arm is clean. I've dressed it. It'll be fine. Okay. Torres should be monitored tonight. The wound is clean, but she lost more blood than she wants to admit, and her blood pressure is... Elena. She stopped moving. Turn around, he said. She turned around. He was standing in the doorway with his jacket off and his shirt untucked, and a cut above his left eyebrow that had bled and dried and that she hadn't seen before because the light in the parking structure had been too poor. He looked, and she searched for the precise word and found it: diminished. Not weak, not defeated, just smaller than the space he'd been occupying for the last 12 hours, as though the thing that had been keeping him at full extension had finally been permitted to release, and without it he was just a person. A tired, worn, 41-year-old person standing in a doorway at 5 in the morning with dried blood on his face. She crossed the room and took his chin in her hand and turned his head toward the light. He let her. She cleaned the cut with the focused attention she gave everything clinical, not gentle exactly, but careful, precise. He sat on the edge of the supply table and held still and watched her face while she worked the way he'd watched her when she'd looked at Torres's arm, the close attention of someone cataloging information they're not sure yet how to use. "It doesn't need stitches," she said. "Okay. It's going to bruise." "Okay." She pressed a clean piece of gauze against it and held it. His hand came up and covered hers, not moving it, just there. Warm. The specific warmth of a hand that has been doing difficult things in a cold building for several hours and is now, for the first time, still. She looked at him. He looked back at her. "It's over," he said. Not a question. "Is it?" "Victor will comply. He doesn't have another move." He paused. "Gerald is in the secure room. I have his full confession on record. My attorney will begin the asset transfer process this afternoon." A pause. "Reyes?" He stopped. She waited. "I don't know what to do about Reyes," he said. And it was the most unguarded sentence she had heard from him in 36 hours. Unpolished, unmanaged, the honest admission of a man who has been confronted with a betrayal that doesn't resolve cleanly because the person who committed it was also a person, was also someone with a brother and a debt, and a fear and a version of the same desperate math that everyone in proximity to this world eventually runs. "You don't have to decide tonight," she said. "No. You can decide tomorrow. Or next week." She removed the gauze. The bleeding had stopped. "Some things don't have a right answer. They just have the answer you can live with." He looked at her for a long moment. "Adrian used to say something like that," he said quietly. "I know," she said. "I taught him that." Something moved through his expression. Grief, and something past grief. The complicated compound that forms when loss and everything that grew alongside it, and despite it occupy the same space. His jaw tightened once. Released. "Go home," he said. "You need to sleep." "This is your home. Then go to your room, the East Wing, the room you were in last night." He looked at her steadily. "You can leave tomorrow if you want to. You can decide what you want to do and where you want to go, and I will help you do it, whatever it is. But tonight, just sleep." She looked at his face, the cut above the eyebrow, the exhaustion that had finally been permitted to show. The careful distance he was maintaining even now, sitting close enough to touch, because some part of him had decided that distance was the thing he owed her. She thought about Adrian, about what Torres had said in the clinic room before everything accelerated, about the box on the high shelf, about a man who had made a decision and been disciplined about it. She thought about herself, about 7 months of running, about the particular kind of tired that comes from surviving alone for long enough that you forget survival was supposed to be a means and not the end. "Okay," she said. He nodded. She gathered the last of the supplies, capped the bottles, closed the cabinet, and picked up her jacket from the chair where she'd put it 2 hours ago. She was at the door when he said her name. She looked back. "Thank you," he said, "for what you did in the parking structure." She thought about standing in front of a man with a weapon at 4 in the morning in a sub-level parking structure with surgical scissors in her pocket. She thought about what she'd felt in that moment, which had not been courage exactly. Something less dramatic and more fundamental. The feeling of a woman who has already lost the most important thing and has therefore recalibrated her relationship to risk in ways she couldn't fully explain. "I wasn't going to let him shoot you," she said. "I know." He paused. "That's what I'm thanking you for." She looked at him one more time. Then she went upstairs. She slept until 1 in the afternoon. When she woke, the room was full of winter light. The pale, particular gold of Chicago in December, coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows at an angle that made the dust motes visible and turned the room into something that almost resembled peace. She lay still for several minutes, which she hadn't done in months, hadn't permitted herself to. There had always been the next thing, the next shift, the next bill, the next calculation about what she could afford to feel and for how long. She lay still and let herself exist without moving toward anything. The baby moved, a long, slow roll, the gesture of a child waking from a deep sleep in a warm space. She put her hand over it and felt the pressure of it against her palm and thought about Adrian. Not the way she usually thought about him, the acute, specific grief of a wound that hasn't healed, but differently, more broadly. The whole of him. The terrible cooking and the laugh that came too loud and the way he'd held her face in both hands when he told her she was pregnant. That specific expression of a man encountering the best news of his life and not quite having the vocabulary for it. She thought about what he would say about all of this. She knew exactly what he would say. He would say, in that direct Adrian way that left no room for equivocation, "Elena, you walked into a parking structure at 4 a.m. to face a crime lord, and you were carrying my son. That's either the bravest thing you've ever done or the most insane." He would pause. Then he would say, "Both. Definitely both." She was almost smiling when she got up. Walt. Damien was in the kitchen. This struck her as unexpected, not because she'd imagined him incapable of the space, but because the kitchen of the Vale estate was a room that required a particular kind of ordinariness to occupy. And ordinariness was not what she'd associated with him. But there he was, at the counter with 2 cups of coffee already made and a plate of toast that someone had prepared and he had apparently forgotten to eat, reading something on his phone with the unconscious focus of a man who processes work the way other people process breathing. He looked up when she came in. His hair was damp. He'd changed. The cut above his eyebrow had been butterfly bandaged, badly, the strip applied at the wrong angle. And she had the brief, involuntary thought that she would have to redo that later, followed by the equally involuntary awareness that she was thinking about later, as though it were a thing she was planning to be present for. "Coffee," he said, gestured at the second cup. She sat at the counter and picked it up. They were quiet for a moment. The kitchen was warm. Outside, Lake Michigan was visible beyond the bare trees, slate gray and vast, moving in long, slow swells under an overcast sky. "My attorney called an hour ago," Damien said. "Victor's documentation has already started transferring. He worked through the night." He set the phone down. "It's more than I expected. His financial network is more complex than my intelligence suggested." A pause. "It'll take weeks to fully process. But it's legitimate. It's real." "He's actually gone," Elena said. He left Chicago at 7 this morning. He looked at the lake. "I had him followed to the city limits. He was on a private flight to Montreal by 9. She absorbed that. "And Gerald," she said. Damien picked up his coffee, set it down without drinking. "Gerald gave me the final piece this morning," he said, "before my attorney arrived. The names of the 3 men who built the device." He paused. 2 of them are still in the country. My federal contact received that information at 11 a.m. A pause. "Gerald's cooperation is documented. What happens to him legally is no longer something I control. But his assets? The transfer began last night. Financial investigators have already frozen 4 accounts." He looked at her directly. "A trust is being established. Adrian's name on it. Every dollar recovered from Gerald's holdings connected to the freight arrangement. It goes into the trust." He stopped. "For the baby." She looked at her coffee cup. "You don't have to do that," she said. I know I don't." "Damien, it's Adrian's money. It was paid for Adrian's roots, Adrian's information, Adrian's—" He stopped. Exhaled. "It was paid for Adrian. It belongs to his son." She was quiet for a long time. Outside, a gull crossed the window, white against the gray sky, there and gone. "It's a boy," she said. He looked at her. "I've known for months. I didn't want to say it out loud because—" She stopped. "I don't know why. Some version of superstition, maybe. Like if I said it, it became more real, and if it was more real, it could be taken more easily." She looked at her hands around the coffee cup. "But it's a boy. I'm certain of it." Damien was very still. "Adrian's son," he said, very quietly. "Yes." He looked at the window. His jaw moved once, then was still. "He would have been—" He stopped. "I know," she said. "I know he would have been." They sat with that for a while. Just sat with it. The specific weight of it and the specific lightness of it. The impossible coexistence of grief and forward motion, of what was lost and what was still here, still moving, still making its presence known beneath her ribs with the insistent, oblivious vitality of new life that doesn't know yet what it has already cost. The toast went cold on the plate between them. Neither of them touched it. But she stayed. She didn't make a declaration of it, didn't announce a decision. She simply stayed past the day she'd told herself she would decide, and then past the day after that. And the decision assembled itself in the space her exhaustion had vacated, quietly, without the drama she had expected from it. She had her own room, her own key. The East Wing had a garden-facing sitting room she claimed as hers without discussion, a small desk near the window where she began to write. Not journal, exactly. Something more intentional than that. The record she wanted Adrian's son to have of who his father had been. Not the version the world would eventually piece together. Not the version that lived in case files and financial records and the testimony of people who had known Adrian Voss as an operator in a criminal organization. The actual version. The Sunday frittata that wasn't a frittata. The courthouse. The coffee. The way he held her face. She wrote it in longhand because typing felt too clean for the material. Damien left her to it. He had his own work. The weeks that followed, the night in the parking structure, were consumed by the process of dismantling everything Victor Moreau had spent 20 years building. The careful, documented, legally structured work of an organization that had learned to make power look like business. She heard him on the phone in the evenings, saw him at meals when he was home, learned the rhythm of his presence and his absence, the specific texture of coexisting with someone in a space large enough to contain both of you without requiring you to occupy the same square footage. It wasn't simple. There were things between them that weren't resolved, that lived in the spaces between sentences and the specific kind of tension that doesn't have a clean name. She would find him sometimes at the window of the study she'd begun to use, standing with his coffee and looking at the lake with the expression she'd first seen on him in the car the morning after. And she would stand in the doorway and not announce herself, and eventually he would say something practical and direct, and they would talk about the trust, or about Gerald's assets, or about Dr. Soria's last report, and the other thing would remain unaddressed, which was both its natural state and a pressure she could feel building by increments. She let it build. She was not ready for it, and she knew she was not ready for it, and she thought Damien knew it too, and was disciplined about it in the way Torres had described, putting things in boxes, labeling them, putting them on high shelves. She thought about that, and she thought about Adrian, and she thought about what it means to be a person who has survived something, and whether survival is the same as living, and she wrote in her longhand notebook, and the baby grew. Lucas Adrian Voss was born on a Thursday in February at 7 minutes past midnight. Dr. Soria delivered him in the clinic on Michigan Avenue, the same one where Elena had been brought the night of the Blackstone Lounge, a detail she noted with the kind of dark symmetry that felt like something Adrian would have appreciated. He weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces. He was bald and red-faced and furious about the fact of his own existence in the way of all newborns, his voice enormous relative to his size, filling the room with a sound that was too big for him and entirely adequate to the occasion. Elena held him first, for a long time. She held him and looked at his face, looking for Adrian in it, which she'd been warned she wouldn't find clearly yet, the features too new, too undifferentiated. And then she found it anyway. Something around the eyes, something in the way his brow creased when he cried, the specific angle of the expression, the look of a person confronting an unfair situation with maximum volume. She laughed. The laugh surprised her. She hadn't known it was coming. Damien was in the waiting area. He'd driven her to the clinic at 11 p.m. when she told him it was time. He had maintained his composure throughout the drive with a focused competence that she'd learned to recognize as his version of anxiety. The more controlled he became, the more something in him needed controlling. He'd sat in the waiting area for 5 hours with his phone mostly face down on the seat beside him, which was the tell. Dr. Soria came out at 12:20 and told him the baby was healthy. He nodded. Dr. Soria waited. He nodded again. She said he could come in now. He was standing in the doorway of the recovery room when Elena looked up. Lucas was asleep against her chest. The enormous fury subsided, his face smoothed into something approaching serenity by the fundamental animal comfort of warmth and proximity. Damien stood at the threshold with his jacket off and his sleeves pushed up and his hands at his sides and his expression entirely unmanaged for the first time she could remember seeing it. "Come in," she said. He crossed the room. He stood beside the bed and looked at the baby with the expression of a person encountering something they have been steeling themselves against feeling and have failed, comprehensively, in the endeavor. "Do you want to hold him?" she said. He looked at her. She could see him deciding whether he was allowed to want that. "Yes," he said. She showed him how to take him, the specific geometry of a newborn, the support for the head. And he took Lucas Adrian Voss with the careful, complete attention of someone performing the most important task of their lives and knowing it. Lucas made a small sound and then was still. His brow creased briefly, the Adrian expression, and Damien's breath hitched, just once. Then he steadied. He stood at the window with the baby while the city outside was dark and quiet and the lake was invisible beyond it, and Elena watched him from the bed and felt the particular weight of the moment. All the weight of everything that had brought them here, the blood and the loss and the parking structure and the 14 months of Heiress and the bomb on the bridge in March and the courthouse coffee and the terrible frittata, all of it compressed into this room, this window, this man holding a child who had arrived on the other side of all of it. "He has Adrian's frown," Damien said quietly. "I know. He's going to use it constantly." "I know." She paused. "Adrian did." Damien looked at the baby. Something in his face had settled, not resolved, not simplified, but settled, the way water settles after it's been disturbed, finding its own level, becoming still without becoming shallow. "I'm going to tell him about his father," Damien said. Not to her exactly, to the room, to the dark window. "When he's old enough, the real version, not the version that makes it easier." "I know you will," she said. He looked at her. She held his gaze across the room, across the bed and the dim light and the particular intimacy of a space where something enormous has just happened, and both people in it are still finding the shape of what comes next. She was not ready to say the thing that was in the room between them. Not tonight. Tonight was for Lucas, and for Adrian's name said quietly in a window, and for the simple fact of having arrived at a morning that once seemed impossible to reach. But she thought he knew she was still there. She thought he understood that still being here was not nothing. "Sit down," she said. "You've been standing for 6 hours." He looked around, found the chair, pulled it close to the bed, and sat with the baby still held against him with that careful, total attention. He sat, and she leaned back against the pillow, and Lucas slept between them in Damien's arms, and outside the window Chicago began, very slowly, to become morning. Gray first, then gold. The lake appearing out of the dark by degrees, its surface cold and vast and indifferent to everything the city had survived, moving in long, slow swells the way it always moved, the way it had moved before any of them existed and would move after. Lucas made a small sound in his sleep. Damien adjusted his hold, automatically, the instinct already formed in the short time he'd been holding him, and the baby settled again. Elena watched. She thought, this is what it looks like on the other side. Not clean, not simple, not the resolution that erases the cost of getting here, but real. The complicated, imperfect, ongoing real of people who have survived something together and are now sitting in a hospital room at dawn trying to figure out what that means. She thought about Adrian. She thought, I'm going to be okay. I think we're going to be okay. She didn't know if that was a message to him or to herself or to the room or to the child sleeping in the arms of the most dangerous man in Chicago, who was sitting very still in a plastic hospital chair, trying not to wake a newborn, which was somehow the most human she had ever seen another person be. She closed her eyes. Outside, the lake kept moving. Chicago kept breathing. And in the quiet of a clinic room on Michigan Avenue, with the city waking around them and the light changing on the water, Damien Vale sat with Adrian Voss's son and did not put him down for a very long time. "Fade out,"